Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Ask The Analyst session for the 2025 Fosway 9 Grid for Digital Learning. I'm John Kennard, Content Editor at Fosway Group, Europe's #1 HR industry analyst, and I'll be your host for today's session. Founded in 1996, Fosway Group provides in-depth corporate research on next-gen HR talent and learning practices. If we could skip to the next slide. We provide analyst and advisory services to more than 3,000 European and international headquartered multinationals and corporates, as well as independent vendor research and EMEA market commentary. Before we launch into the main body of the session, let me also take this moment to tell you about the Fosway Corporate Network. This is a private network for corporate HR learning and talent leaders, offering deeper access to data and insights behind the 9 grids and realities research, monthly virtual roundtables on key topics, private analyst time, and accelerated buying support. There's much more besides this. Do contact us if you're interested in learning more. So on to the Digital Learning 9 Grid this year. The report shows the need to demonstrate value is becoming increasingly popular. It means that features such as performance analytics are now an essential element of functionality and can help sell digital learning as an indispensable part of your people strategy. So I'm delighted to welcome lead analyst on this research, Myles Runham, to dissect and discuss all the findings in this latest iteration of the Digital Learning 9 Grid. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. We will have a Q&A session at the end. Use the chat button. Please use the chat pane. Post your questions in the chat. It's open to all. Please do play nicely. I'll ask your questions throughout. I'll also gather them up for the Q&A section at the end. I think that's it for the preamble. Apart from this bit, Myles, do tell us a bit more about the process of putting together a 9 grid.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, John. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Looking forward to this. Please do, as John said, use the chat for any questions. Also, comments. Ask each other questions. It'd be great to have make this as much of a conversation as possible, as well as obviously hearing from Fosway. Want to make sure that we get your perspective in the process as well. So. This is just a little bit of the background for the research process to each 9 grid. So this is true for the digital learning one, but it's the same method for each of the 9 grids that are published each year in all of the segments. So it's one of the things, I suppose, that sort of as a producer and a sort of a preparer of the 9 grid analysis, it can be interesting. There's a lot of focus on the one diagram at the end of the process, but actually, this is a sort of a multi-year process that gets a 9 grid ready as we look through, as John was describing, inputs and commentary throughout the year from our corporate research network members, and that's in the form of sort of formal and informal meetings, but also we run research roundtables on various themes throughout the year. And obviously we have relationships with our kind of advisory and consultancy clients as well. So those are kind of really significant inputs. There's the public research, so things like the digital learning realities, perhaps most useful and most pertinent for this 9 grid itself. There's also closer to the sort of the actual the production of the analysis itself for the grid. We run a structured data capture process. So that's where we approach a large number of vendors in each segment. So it's kind of over 80 vendors that are approached in the digital learning instance for input on functional capability. So that's the kind of solutions that they support and create. The systems and processes, the methodology, and the service elements. Particularly service is very significant for digital learning, and also for non-functional capabilities as well. And alongside that, we gather information about commercial performance, of core company performance, of revenue, customer trends, etc. as well. And those are supplemented with a briefing meeting for as many of the vendors as we can manage. That includes sort of system and capability demonstrations, roadmap updates, company strategy, business performance, etc. Investment plans, a sort of quite a wide-ranging inquiry. We really sort of get into the detail of that data capture. And ongoing throughout the year, obviously, we have various meetings with on the corporate and the vendor side throughout the year at events, user conferences, etc. As you might expect. And perhaps one thing to emphasize here at the bottom, which I think is and this is extremely significant in the actual placement of the vendors is that the formal customer reference process, which takes a couple of forms. One is a survey for customer satisfaction feedback, and then another is for for as many customers as we can cover. We'll have a sort of short customer reference interview as well, so we understand a little bit more about the context for the selection of a vendor, how they fit in the ecosystem, what they've been used for, how that's going, etc. as well. So those are the components that go into the 9-grid analysis itself. And so there are, and then that allows us then to introduce the criteria for selection. So if this is a repetition, it's worth emphasizing that our lens on the market, as John said, this is Fosway is a European focused analyst firm, so we look at the buying behavior of corporate buyers that are headquartered in EMEA. That's our kind of focus on the market. So we have a very sort of clear, I guess, European focus there, and inclusion is based on active use amongst that corporate research network as I described, but also active consideration, and that's that consideration or the potential to achieve those that gives us the insight that we need to include new vendors on the roadmap each time. And although we say it every time, it seems to be never can we repeat too much the idea that there is no pay to play. So it's objective research each year. So there's no sort of a commercial relationship or payment for placement or inclusion, even inclusion in the research. It's something that we run as an objective process. So just to emphasize, and I think I'm going to try harder to emphasize that continuously. I thought it was clear, but I have learned that it does bear repetition. So just to emphasize that one more time here. So we've probably talked about this a little bit already, but the primary analysis point is shaped by that customer view. So it's about solution performance, service performance with customers. That's the most conclusive component of the analysis. Thank you, Robert, for your support to the objectivity. It's good to know. We'll stick with it, and I will. And thank you also for the endorsement of repeating it. I will do so. So yeah, primary point of view is the customers. The vendor input is obviously crucial, but it doesn't trump that customer view. It's the customer's perspective that sort of is the conclusive point. But obviously, we have a lot of opportunity to speak with vendors, not just in those briefing sessions, but throughout the year for each segment, as which allows us to keep up to date with roadmaps, check in on strategy, etc. So basically, there's I guess it's sort of the cliche of the tip of the iceberg. So that the 9-grid diagram itself is a sort of snapshot view each year of the market. Underneath that is an enormous amount of analysis and data capture, sort of a judgment and insight that we apply to getting to that one point. And it's more, I guess, this is something as the author of the reports. Would encourage you, if you haven't done it yet, but do take a look at the reports when you have time as well. That we try and include as many of those kind of market and solution trends and insights as we can that we think are the most important drivers, both to the analysis that we create, but also sort of, I suppose, trends for the future as well. Which is obviously the focus perhaps of a lot of the conversation today. But there's a lot more than just the diagram. I guess again is that point. In terms of the digital learning provision, or how, I suppose this is sort of how we define the market really, is that there are 5 principal kind of characteristics that we look for in I suppose describing successful digital learning provision, and the ability to be a transformative partner for digital learning service buyers. And it's the learning experience, as you might expect, which is obviously there's a lot of content focus there. It's not just content, but it's a lot to do with the treatment management of content. Very often, if not always, although not quite always, there'll be some kind of platform component, either to manage the availability or to support a particular kind of specialism or service that creates those solutions in the form of the learning experiences. consulting is a really important part of the digital learning market as well. And perhaps we might come to this a little bit later as well in terms of the trends and that doesn't just necessarily mean sort of a consultation about what the solution could be. I think it's becoming a more competitive dynamic. I'm straying into trends here as well, but I think the consulting capability is becoming a more competitive dynamic, particularly for bespoke solution providers and for the managed services, the ability to identify, quantify, qualify problems is a really significant part of the market and becoming more competitive, particularly for large buyers. So the consulting component is really important. The service element's really significant as well. So this is sort of what you might expect in terms of support, but also in terms of managing the entire process through conception through to sort of delivery and through to optimization as well. Those services are very significant in the digital learning context. And thought leadership significant. This isn't necessarily just sort of the provision of thought leadership material. I suppose that's significant and is a good signal, but really thought leadership is probably here where we see that as a signal of being sort of active in trying to lead the market. So lead the thinking in the market, perhaps sort of innovative approaches, and the ability to express and show that kind of a leading participation in the industry as well is very significant. So those are the components that sort of we draw together to understand digital learning provision. I guess those are the components that make up the market from our perspective. And just a quick note as we get it, we'll look at the in a second. We'll look at the actual diagram itself, the grid diagram, and some of the key market headlines. There's a difference between suites, I suppose, or full service provision in the form of suites and specialist providers in the analysis. This can change and does often change each year as obviously, specialisms evolve and develop and new specialisms arrive in the market as well. Suite providers tend to be a kind of full service looking across content, both bespoke perhaps and off the shelf, the enablement of blended and increasingly social and collaborative components of coaching, can be digital adoption tools are in there as well, and those elements of consulting and platform opportunity. So there is really sort of a significant component across each of those areas, and then obviously within the industry, then there are some sort of specific specialists. Probably the most enduring of them are off-the-shelf content library providers, but also the aggregators of those libraries as well. Maybe we could talk about some of the dynamics that are shifting there as well. And there's an important kind of class or category of specialisms in terms of simulations of scenario-based experiences, which are becoming more significant. Again, perhaps we'll come to that. So those are probably the two most significant categories of specialists that we cover. There are some others there, in terms of, well, now this year, in fact, synthetic media providers, but also maybe some specialists in terms of skills validation, etc. as well. So excuse me, I'm just going to take a drink. And John, I don't know, shall I stop on any of the commentary or shall I just keep going? There's a couple of questions which I didn't catch as I was going.
Yeah, there's questions coming in. Keep them coming in. I think Fiona's answered one in the
Okay, thank you,
chat
Fiona.
already, which is great, which is about why our focus on EMEA. There's obviously overlap, but I think Fiona can explain it much better than I can. There's a couple of others about how we define digital learning, which you can see, Miles. I don't know whether you want to field that now or whether we can wait till the end.
Maybe we'll just looking at those. Thank you, Richard and Robert. Maybe we'll come to those because I think it's not that we're going to cover them necessarily, but maybe we can sort of wrap those in
Sure.
as well. So what I'll do was we'll take a look then at the grid itself, and I wanted to just make I suppose a few remarks about sort of headlines, and this is drawing some of the highlights of the analysis from the report itself. But I think these are kind of I suppose these are useful and useful background and trends that have driven a lot of what we've seen in the market in the last 12 months or 12 months or more. I think that the top one's an obvious point, but it's probably, I think, is actually more of an important driver than AI in many respects, is that the market has been impacted by tough economic climate. That's no surprise. It's not necessarily news, but it's very significant across all segments, I think, that Fosway cover. I think one of the things that's interesting, though, is that in the digital learning context, the last 2 years, I guess, that this report and the previous report, we've seen this sort of tight, tough economic market, so harder to find growth as a provider. harder to find new customers, maybe longer buying cycles, more proof of impact or demonstration of impact required. Think decisions going higher up the chain, taking longer, etc. Those are some of the dynamics we've seen over the last couple of years. I think one of the things that we've seen this year that's perhaps slightly different is there's been a much more emphasis on the corporate side, on the buyer side of headcount freezes or even headcount reductions, which means which changes the approach to the market, but also changes then the customer's capabilities and an ability to kind of resource solutions as well. And that's a really important factor, this idea of sort of efficiency, terrible phrase, doing more with less, which never seems to properly make sense, but it's that sentiment that's out there in the market. I think one of the interesting dynamics as well that is kind of easy to overlook is that we haven't really seen significant slowdown in the digital learning market before. It's been a story of growth. Either in good times the market has just grown, so we've seen sort of double-digit growth and more many times in the past. If there has been a harder time, then digital learning has tended to benefit from a switch from face-to-face to digital, which is effectively a saving anyway. That's less true now. I think post-pandemic and in the sort of current economic climate, I think that's less true. I think that's a sort of perhaps a less familiar dynamic in the market. And I think a lot of vendors are having to work harder in that respect, to win new business and cut through than they have done in the past. And it also leads to the second point, the sort of demonstrating value is still key or is key. And it's again, that's an obvious point, arguably, but it hasn't always been true. There's a real pressure to show that investment that has a purpose and a clear purpose, a quantified purpose, but also to be able to show that the extent to which that purpose is being met, which is what you might anticipate. But the market hasn't really been dominated by that factor in the way that it has been in the last sort of 18 months plus, I think. So the economy is sort of really focusing on that demonstration of value. I think for larger scale, perhaps bespoke programs, or larger scale purchases, that really is about demonstrating that what the impact will be, or the value to anticipate as well, and being able to quantify that. So that's some of the that sort of those two massive drivers in the market, and I think they have an impact on the third point. In fact, AI efficiency rather than innovation so far. So that's a generalization. There's an enormous amount of activity with AI. I think last year we saw AI being sort of talked about and planned in roadmaps with some releases and some functionalities and features. I think what we've seen, unsurprisingly, and those of you who visited Learning Technologies in London, last month would have seen this, that there's an enormous amount of activity that's gone on in the last 12 months plus to bring AI into live roadmaps. I think what we've probably seen is a little bit more of the focus on efficiency in current workflows and current solution types rather than sort of genuine product innovations. Perhaps it's more process innovation than product innovation as a generalization. So far, there are signals of greater innovation. I think it's kind of interesting, perhaps it's instructive as well, is that there's this huge wave of AI development and that focus on efficiency, not exclusive focus, but a focus on efficiency, has happened in times of more economic hardship as well, or sort of tighter times where that there is that sort of sense of extending value. And I think AI feels like an opportunity there. That phrase again, I don't like it, but I'm going to say it again: doing more with less. Can be sort of supported, or at least I think there is an anticipation for some senior stakeholders that AI is a really, really beneficial opportunity to help with that sort of more with less capability. So I think we're seeing a lot of that kind of dynamic as well, and a lot of focus on AI in content design, so media asset creation, learning solution and content design and production. And the processes that go into that as well, such as translation, voice synthesis, synthetic media, etc. as well. So those are really important dynamics. And there's a couple of points on. It might be worth, John. I'm just thinking of going back to the question on AI whilst I paused on that. What's the difference between a digital and an AI provider? I'll
Sure.
try, Robert. I will try and interpret the question there. I mean, I suppose one difference would be, are the businesses that we cover are probably unlikely to be AI providers. There's a couple there, Synthesia and Colossian as additions this year, who are kind of AI first, I guess, AI specialists. And Colossian particularly focused very much on the learning market. Synthesia focused on the learning and corporate comms markets. I guess they're the two instances where, they are kind of AI specialists or AI first providers. I think for the purposes of the analysis, excuse me, that we're looking at here, or the result of the analysis that we're looking at here, I guess it's the application of artificial intelligence to create, manage, and supply digital learning solutions would be the difference. So, AI is one of those technology inputs into the solution rather than the solution itself. I think that's an important distinction, and I think it's an interesting dynamic in the market as well. And this is something that we have something of a sort of privileged position here. I think that we get the opportunity to look across the market at multiple, many roadmaps and capabilities, and we see a lot of the most recent and highlighted development. And in terms of AI, particularly when we're thinking of looking at generative AI and the use of the foundation models, the large language models, everybody's using the same models. They have access to the same technology, and so the ability to offer a clear sense of sustainable differentiation, isn't as simple there. Everybody can use ChatGPT, or they can use Claude, or they can use Gemini and the APIs that those services offer in their solutions. So, what does that mean to the value that's brought to the market, and how can that be clearly communicated? I think that's an interesting dynamic that we perhaps haven't seen so clearly before as well. I hope that addressed the question. Yeah, do keep the questions coming. I'll mop up on so we'll get some questions as well in a moment. There's a couple of other trends I wanted to highlight. Because it's very easy to get lost in the AI conversation. I think one of the things that we've seen, particularly in the last 12 months, is that this idea of learning together, it feels like it's sort of an underserved need. It's at a premium. I think it's been an underserved need in the digital learning market for a long time, actually. Genuinely sort of well-designed, collaborative social learning experiences have been poorly supported in the market. I think it's true in digital learning. It's true. I think it's equally true, although Fiona will correct me if I'm wrong, in the learning systems market as well, is that providers haven't invested heavily in this in the past. But I think one of the things that we're seeing, particularly on the corporate side, and perhaps this is more for the kind of transformation projects and the large scale skills development projects and business change, is that there's a real demand for solutions and programs that offer the ability of people to spend time together as they learn. And that's not necessarily just spend time together, in a classroom or a virtual classroom in a blended learning experience. It can be much more sophisticated than that. But the idea here is that time together is at a premium, and it can't be there are few, if any, real substitutions for that. And I think it's interesting that there aren't many providers who can serve that need well. But there is a growing or a more apparent and obvious demand. Perhaps there's a little bit of that's to do with sort of post-COVID fragmentation, I think, as organizations try and figure out what it means to spend time together at work and how to support that time as part of learning experiences and experience design. I think it's also, though, it's about the kinds of experiences you can create, and also those kind of more perhaps the softer drivers of behavior change, values, etc., as well as being able to practice and rehearse skills, in a live environment and get feedback. Those are all components that are driving this sense of a premium for learning together, which I think is broadly underserved, not completely underserved, but there's opportunity there in the market as well. Alongside that, we've seen sort of real momentum for practice, I guess, and simulations gathering steam. Simulations can mean a number of different things. So that could be sort of game-like scenarios. It can be business simulations, sort of more or less high fidelity. And the programs, and particularly the platforms that support these, that a lot of that is to do with kind of scenario exploration, perhaps more sort of self-driven programs and capabilities. I think the ability to practice skills, practice them in something that looks and feels like a live or work environment is a really important driver there, and get feedback on that. And so we're seeing that, with I think it probably stops a little bit short of the virtual reality and sort of the kind of 3D immersive worlds, where perhaps this was the first year that it wasn't the year of virtual reality, really. We've seen that's an important driver in the market, but in quite specialist areas, maybe in sort of certain areas of manufacturing and sort of high risk physical environments where it's very expensive to offer those kinds of live practice learning experiences. But practice, simulation, feedback are really, really important drivers of the market, particularly practice and feedback and rehearsal for skills. So that's a quick tour of some of well, that's my selection, I guess, of drivers in the market. We'll move on now to sort of to the Q&A section. And I don't know, John, sorry, I've been talking, so I haven't really been paying attention to questions as they've come in. Is there anything that you want to highlight?
Yep, there's been some questions in. We had some questions in advance as well. In the interest of working in reverse chronological order, democratically, maybe we should ask Sergio's questions
Okay.
first. I know you said you had a chance to consider these a bit more as well, Miles, but they're kind of about, well, the big picture is it's a question about what will happen to off-the-shelf content and the industry around that. So let's take the first part, which is about content vendors with their own delivery platform. Do you think they will, such as Udemy, LinkedIn, Skillsoft, etc., do you think they will lead the learning experience?
I suppose can I just sort of back up a little bit to try and interpret Sergio's question a little bit for the audience who didn't have the opportunity of reading the email. I don't have the email in front of me, Sergio, so apologies, but I think the thrust of your question was that there's an opportunity through the arrival of AI to, in some guise or other, deconstruct the course, the kind of structured linear learning experience can be deconstructed or perhaps be disrupted, depending on your point of view, into something that's more dynamic and personalized, that will be much more personally specific and relevant to the individual and their context. And I think you were referencing maybe skills as one, sort of skills as a potential driver of that. So rather than that kind of unified course experience, you have something that's much more dynamic and personal, signaled from the capability of the learner, their proficiency, and the context of their organization. And I think then referenced some of those platform and library providers such as Udemy, Udacity, etc., and LinkedIn. And I think so. I think one of the interesting things, and I don't think I suspect, Sergio, that no one knows the answer to this at the moment, but there's a lot going on, and there is a thesis out there that the course will disappear and we'll only have these kind of dynamic experiences. I think that trend of learning together actually is something that's sort of maybe in tension there, as I think the ability to do things together and do them at the same time has some specific benefits. So I think there are some limits to that deconstruction. I wonder as well whether have things like onboarding programs where you'll want a cohort arriving and having the same experience, or something that's very, very similar, if not with personal components. So I think there might be some limits to that sort of dynamic deconstruction. I think there's something really, really important about the clear signals of specialism and provenance and expertise in those library providers' armory. Really, I think there's something that the more generic a library looks like and feels like, that maybe sort of with personal skills and leadership and management content, etc. Those are the ones that I think are more open to question. And I think some customers and buyers are thinking, do we like, what's the value of those now that we can offer something that's more dynamic from sort of free web content? Some providers are looking at managing and curating those kind of playlists or pathways of content around skills as well, using just sort of freely available content. So I think that question is open. I think the challenge is really, if you don't have strong signals of specialism and expertise, whether those are, maybe those are brand expertise or they're individual expert, I think that's a really important challenge. I think one of the things that some of those providers you mentioned, those who have, sort of significant platform capability along with the content, is that there is an opportunity there to extract much greater value out of their library capability at the moment. To sort of maybe to construct experiences across the catalog as well, which could be much more valuable than the individual courses, or as valuable as the individual courses. So I think that's one of the dynamics we're seeing, and I think that question is open. But I think there's something important about those signals of specialism to support what otherwise could be quite a generic experience. So I think that's something we're looking out for. John, that was only one of a three-part question. I think from my memory, I've strayed into question 2 there though as well.
You have, but that's good. Continuity. So about publishers and opening up their APIs to large language models to monetize. I mean, this has been in the press significantly, although I guess more from a B2C point of view. But
yeah. Well, no, I think, and obviously, copyright challenges and intellectual property challenges, etc. there, which I think is perhaps, maybe arguably a little bit less of a concern in our corner of the world. I think it's interesting. So I think we've had quite a few conversations about this, and I think one of the challenges here, and it's not to say that won't happen, and I think it will happen at some point, Sergio, that we'll see, the opportunity again for those library providers, the publishers who can demonstrate that they've got something, that has that kind of premium value or exclusivity, perhaps, if not premium. I think that will be an important route to their content, or to the value in the content. I think one of the challenges is the market ready to buy and sell in that way yet? Tend to offer, content is bought as either per topic of a certain amount or a certain number of licenses to access over a year or more. And the ability to buy per use, and maybe per use in a sophisticated way. Not quite sure how that would work yet and how that would be priced. So I think there's some interesting experimentation that we expect to see, over the next coming periods, to try and unlock some of that. What's the business model? What's the pricing model for those things? But I think I think there is the opportunity for some of the value in the libraries, the publisher libraries, to be exploited in that way as well. Again, where it's got that kind of specialist premium or exclusive component to it as well.
Thanks, Miles. Let's round off with part 3. I am going through all the questions. I'm capturing them all. We've got plenty of time, so I will get to them.
Yeah, do keep them coming, please. Yeah.
Yes. But the final part is about, see, this is where there's a bit of a crossover, I guess, into other segments. But Sergio's final question is about the role of AI native HCMs and whether they will work with connected third parties, the publishers of the previous part of his question. Yeah, I don't know if you've got any comment there.
I think they are, and they will. Yeah, I think it's, and this is one of the things I think that Fiona, my colleague, has talked about with the learning systems analysis, over the last few years, but particularly sort of more pointedly, I guess, in the last 12 months, is learning systems providers are moving much more quickly and deliberately into the content market. So to offer authoring capability, content management, to wrap in, if not buy, or build their own content services, and to present those as part of their solution in the learning system, either as part of a catalog or something that looks a bit more like an adaptive or sort of optional pathways through content, and to become more sophisticated in building solutions like that. So I think we'll see more of that. So I think that's going to be an important dynamic in the market. I think one of the other things that will drive that is that those HCM providers, or the learning systems providers as well, will be seen as sort of arguably one fewer provider in the list of contracts and invoices as well. So they'll be able to wrap in some of that content capability into a sort of single buying point. Again, perhaps that's for sort of more generic and the more kind of high volume and higher needs of topics as well. So I think we probably will see developments in that direction. Yes.
Great stuff. Thank you very much, Miles.
I hope, Sergio, thank you for the question. I hope that okay. Thank you. Yeah, I'll take that. I'll take that.
A full and long answer. Yes, indeed. Thank you. Um, Richard asks, you've described performance, but why not a narrative for potential? Well, um, on the X and Y axes of the 9 grid, there's both performance and potential described and laid out. I don't know if that was his question about how.
Well, I'll just so potential. If this is your question, Richard, let us know if you're if it's something else. So potential that the y-axis is about the sort of sophistication, depth, and richness of the solution capability of the providers. So going through from obviously from less to more, and then what you'll tend to see in that top row is the ability to support the range and complexity of larger enterprise, I guess, customers. So the potential is that sort of sophistication, capability, and depth and range of solutions available. So that's what the potential axis is, if that was your question.
Yeah, I think that works. Robert, it's more of a comment from Robert actually about networking advantages in the workplace. You mentioned about learning together. I don't know if this is in reference to how people work together in the workplace with technology. I'm not really sure. Can you see his question, Miles?
Oh, I see. To the extent to which
It would be
learning.
interesting to measure how learning together connects with networking advantages in the workplace.
Yeah, it's a good point, Robert. I suppose, I mean, I guess, that the hypothesis would be that, that those organizations that are better networked and more active in that respect will get more value from those solutions and those capabilities. I don't say we don't necessarily have the data to describe that at the moment. I think one of the things that's interesting though is the extent to which the sort of more regular, I guess, networking and productivity tools can pull off those kind of more complex solutions. So they're kind of those collaborative program experiences tend to be quite, they're quite sort of thoroughly and well designed, and it's quite rare that those more generic tools can support them, if that was the direction of your comment.
Thanks, Miles. A comment and question from Susan. My experience is that internal stakeholders want more learning together, in quote marks, and the vendors and L&D gurus, in quote marks again, continue to push digital and personalized experiences. I don't know if we comment on individual vendors that are innovative for learning together, but can you make some general comments around that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, Susan. I think, as I said, I mean, I think it's slightly untapped demand. I think perhaps one of the reasons I'm not going to speak to the gurus, but perhaps to the providers, talk about it less is because they don't support it very well. I think bluntly, I mean, as a bit of a generalization, it's not true of everyone. Ludic are particularly good. Obviously, Cross Knowledge have capability here. They're not the only ones, but they're probably the two that most obvious. I think it's poorly supported, and I think there's also something that of a bit of a preoccupation in the industry that's been true for as long as I've been in it, which is quite a long time now, that we tend to equate digital learning with self-study. I think that's been sort of a bit of a carryover from the SCORM e-learning module, which is something you do on your own, as a sort of it's a one-to-one or one-to-system relationship, and we don't tend to, that's been the sort of the mode of delivery. I suppose that's compliance has been a major driver of that over time. So I think we have a sort of bit of a preoccupation with self-study as the model of design and delivery in the industry, and I think that's weighed on the ability to offer these kinds of services. I think one of the things, perhaps, I don't know if this is your own experience, Susan, but I think one of the things we do see, though, is that one of the main drivers for those more sort of sophisticated, collaborative, social learning together services comes through business transformation needs, or maybe mergers and acquisitions, or significant change programs, restructuring, etc. Or new projects, new product kickoffs, where there's a drive in the organization to bring everybody together around a program of activity to sort of change direction and go in a new direction. A lot of that then can get wrapped up in those change programs, and perhaps those get serviced elsewhere as well by the large sort of consulting houses, etc. I think that's another factor in the market as well, which I think then puts some of vendors a little bit further out of reach of those customer needs.
Susan says, in my experience, sales and other departments seem to be allergic to self-study. Laugh out loud. Um,
But yeah, that may be true.
yeah. Uh, Neil asks, what reason do you think the economic downturn hasn't coincided with the digital learning uplift, as is commonly the case? Could it be to
Yeah,
do with AI authoring, making in-house building quicker and easier?
I think it's a good question. I think one of the dynamics which I didn't quite express was I suppose we'd seen, where budgets have been tighter, we've tended to see a sort of switch to digital from face to face. I think a lot of that switch has happened over time. So I think we're less seeing that sort of bump that you might have seen for digital learning budgets. I do think that one of the things we have seen that was perhaps, a little bit more buried in the report was that smaller projects have not necessarily disappeared from the market, but they're rare now. And I think that is partly due to sort of substitution from AI internally. So by smaller project means, something around the region of, in pounds, sort of 20K, smaller, quick turnaround, e-learning development, digital learning development projects. A lot of those have gone from the market, and whilst it may have been the economy that drove them away, the anticipation and our anticipation is they're not going to come back in large numbers because a lot of them can now be serviced internally by teams themselves. So that's a combination of their own resources, maybe using some of the content libraries and resources and services that we spoke about earlier, but the ability to kind of repurpose what you have to be able to design and develop content more readily and quickly yourself. I think that's one of those economic drivers. I think so. That has been a factor in the market. That's obviously at one end of the market, but that has been a factor.
Miles. Neil asks, what providers are most forward-thinking in the adaptive learning space? This might be a question for our colleague Fiona, including memorization and workplace implementation. I don't know if there's anything that stands out to you.
Yeah, Fiona might want to chip in here about specific adaptive providers as well. I think one of the interesting things that we've been debating, and not just this is across Fosway, particularly Fiona and I have had a number of conversations, and Fiona's own writing has referred to this as well. I think one of the interesting things that we're sort of waiting to see how it unfolds, I guess, is what are the best solutions now for personalized learning programs? Is it something that's an adaptive platform that's a specialist service that can sort of bring you through your own individual program according to your which adapts around your behavior, your answers to questions, your proficiency, your development, etc., that adapts around your experience to meet your goal? Or will it be, or yes, and will it be something that's more conversational, AI driven, based on, some kind of AI assistant, or potentially in the future something that's more agentic that will then respond to your exploration of a topic, and your ability to sort of demonstrate proficiency, etc. And the personalization comes in that form. I think that's very much an open question at the moment. There's potential on both sides. One of the things I think we are seeing on the adaptive side is that those efficiency gains, more content more quickly and at a lower cost, is starting to help some of those adaptive providers build out their content and in their programs more readily as well, and more quickly, and actually making them perhaps more attractive for customers that might have found them prohibitively expensive in the past as well. So I think Fiona, don't know if you've seen, Neil, Fiona has put some of um, vendors from the learning systems grid there, and Realize It, Drillster, Axonify, Rise Up, and Learning Pool as options to look at there as well.
Yes, thanks, Miles. Thanks, Fiona, as well. I think we know the answer to this, but Robert asks, isn't it true that the AI revolution to some extent will be causing every organization to transform?
I think that's right. Yes, and I think everybody needs to transform as well. I feel it, myself personally. There's a huge amount going on with the way, and myself as an analyst can and does and should use these tools and technologies as well. I think it's going to change everything. I think having said that's a bit of a throwaway remark, and obviously that must be true. It's back to that sort of some of the headlines. I think what we're seeing though is the transformation in the digital learning marketplace. This is, on the buyer and customer side, but particularly the buyer and customer relationship. I think we're seeing the real disruption on the efficiency, so the ability to create, sell and distribute digital learning, particularly learning content, is where the most of the activity is going. That alongside learning assistance, it's a clear need. The industry has been revolved around content for maybe 2 decades, 15 years to 2 decades. So efficiency arriving in a market that's so content focused, it's kind of obvious that so much investment will focus on the transformation of that. So I think what we're seeing now is the impact in those kind of efficiency and availability and speed, etc., rather than that more kind of innovation in terms of product and solution types. There's one other thing I think that I'd love to know, actually, just from this audience, what you think of this. But there's been a lot of commentary around the risk of more cheap crap content coming on the market, and the last thing we need is more cheap content, and this anticipation that content quality will suffer as a result of the ability to make content more quickly and cheaply. I don't think we're seeing that much, actually, or not as much as you might have anticipated. So, and this is a bit of a sort of emerging theme from our AI research, which we'll reference a little bit before we sign off. But I think on the supplier side, there's a real focus on not allowing the efficiency to reduce quality. Whether quality is at the right level or not in the first place is a good question, but not to allow efficiency to reduce quality on the service provider side. And I think that focus is very sharp on the corporate side, on the learning and development function side internally as well. There's a real nervousness about a reduction in quality. Quality can mean a number of different things, but so I'm a little bit more either less pessimistic or optimistic about that than I thought. I was perhaps thinking of that, that Donald Taylor's beige wave phrase, but I don't think that maybe the wave's not as beige as we thought. Maybe it's a bit more colourful. I'm going to depart from that metaphor, John, now, but I think it's one point that's worth emphasising or referencing.
The beige wave.
Well, it's not my phrase, actually. I was quoting.
I've not heard that. I'll ask him about it. Thanks, Miles. 10 minutes to go. We still have time for a few more questions. Another one from Sergio. You're not abusing the questions at all. Keep them coming. I'll ask as many as I possibly can. But he does ask, why do you think organizations are not exploring more on cohort-based learning and learning together? Is it because of the complexity? Is it because of TCO, brackets, total cost of ownership, and or the lack of end-to-end solutions? What do you think?
Yeah, I think Sergio kind of, not trying to be smart and lazy, but I think yes to all of those things. I think partly the market is, as I said, I think it's underserved, so I think that makes it harder to buy from. But also it means that the choice and range of solutions perhaps isn't there that might have been there if there was more meaningful focus on this in the past. I think one of the other factors is it's hard, it's complicated and hard to do well. A good social learning, collaborative learning program, over, let's say, 3+ months with, cohorts across, a large organization in different countries, etc. It's, it's difficult. And what the L&D profession has tended to focus on is the ability to facilitate, in a group, in a room. That's very significant. But I think what we're seeing now is the need to facilitate, maybe it's a bit of a redefinition of facilitation to involve areas of program design, the data analytics that support it, facilitation of the classroom, but also community hosting, managing those kind of campaign like prompts and nudges through a program, and a richer sort of design of activity and feedback that runs through those programs. So it's complex and difficult to do well at scale as well. So I think genuinely that's one of the reasons it's harder. But also, I think it's a different way of thinking about how we support learning in an organization as well. Perhaps not different for everybody, but I think those are probably the focus. Again, I think it's that preoccupation with self-study on the vendor and the customer side historically.
Excuse me. Thank you, Miles. Great question here from Susan. Do you think we've got space and time for another 9 grid in the 12-month cycle, Miles?
I will make inquiries, John. I'm not going to commit.
She asks, will there be a new category of vendors that combines LMS and knowledge management with an AI engine to support both onboarding and chat GPT type just-in-time learning?
I think it's a great question, Susan. I think it's really interesting to see the potential of large language models as a solution to that sort of knowledge management headache that's been true for every organization I've ever worked in. But I think one of the interesting choices that technology leaders and investors or funders in an organization will make is where's the best point of entry or the best points of entry to that knowledge management solution. And is that going to be in the learning system? That's one opportunity. Certainly, for more sort of learning type content and knowledge, then arguably yes. Or, not this is necessarily exclusive, or is it more likely that some interface of knowledge management capability in the productivity tools of the organization, and the sort of the maybe the kind of CRM solutions such as Salesforce, or in the Microsoft stack and Teams, etc., and SharePoint, those kind of solutions, sort of portals. Is that a different, a more useful entry point? I suspect there isn't a single answer to that, but I think that's one of the big decisions that's on the corporate side that needs to be made. I think one of the challenges, I guess, on the learning system side is do they make sense as a knowledge management solution beyond sort of the learning environment, and what's that association with those tools and products? I guess there's a question to answer there as well. But there's no reason to say that's not, they don't have that capability. But I think there's some interesting decisions to take there. I think knowledge management feels like a great opportunity for learning overall. Whether that's something that that's kind of owned in that way by L&D, or something that was we as professionals kind of actively participate in, I guess will probably change, or the answer to that will change depending on your organization.
Thank you, Miles.
Sorry, John, there's a point, Susan. Just to interrupt you.
Sure.
IT wants to consolidate, and I think that's a really important point, Susan. Thank you for adding it. That I think that's really important. That particularly this is true in larger scale enterprises and organizations, that are complex. The CTO and the IT organization always want to sort of tidy up, I guess, and I think that's a really, really important impulse in that decision making, which arguably plays in favor of those sort of more kind of corporate productivity and knowledge management solutions. But we will see.
I think we have time for one more question before we head to the closing slides, where there's some important information, which is from Fran, who asks, do you hear much mention of a demand for accessibility by default in customers' consideration of tools, especially with the European Accessibility Act upcoming?
Yeah. Very good point, Fran. And yes, I think we do. I think this is something over the last couple of years, it's been really encouraging to see actually that you see on the vendor side it being taken much more seriously as a kind of price of entry. Partly that's to do with regulatory changes, but also because those regulatory changes are there, and the sort of the lobbying that's built up to them has raised awareness on the customer side that this is really important stuff. That we need to support everybody as far as possible, regardless of of kind of needs and expectations. I think it is a really important driver in terms of the demos and the solutions and the capability that we monitor in the functional model and the data that we gather there. It is becoming much more important. And I think one of the things that's encouraging there, not to say that anybody should take their foot off the gas, but is that I think the playing field is leveling out a bit. There is an expectation of that the minimum requirement is at a more useful level than it used to be as well. Not to rest on any laurels, but I think it is becoming more important, and the expectations are rising. Yeah.
Great stuff, Miles. Thank you very much. Let's move on to our closing slides. I think that's all the questions today.
Just to say to anybody, if something comes up that you didn't ask and you want to, then find me or John or us on LinkedIn, or send us a message. We're happy to try and pick up something. If you had that moment, I wish I'd asked, or something comes to you afterwards, then do let us know, please. And thank you very much for a great set of questions as well. Really interesting conversation.
You're welcome to find me on LinkedIn, and I'll refer you to someone who can answer the question properly.
So will I.
So if we can move to the next slide, just want to mention about our research project, AI and HR Talent and Learning. It's a deep research project to get beyond the AI hype and noise. taking a detailed look at the reality of AI in HR and learning and the benefits that these teams are realizing from all the innovations, the AI innovations across the employee lifecycle. Become a core participant to find out the inside story and get answers to your specific questions about AI approach or vendor capability. There is a lot going on here. Do contact Jack Smith at fosway.com. And on to the next one, just a few more things to talk about. The Fosway Corporate Network, we've already mentioned it, but do scan the QR code on your screen to find out more. Inside access to more detailed research, benchmark reports, analyst time, private corporate roundtables, plenty more besides that. Thank you for all your questions, Sergio, Fran, Susan, Richard, Robert. I don't know if I missed anyone or not. And the very last
Neil.
slide, a few more links that are really, really helpful. We have the full 9-grid for digital learning. We've got the Knowledge Centre. Sorry, on to the next slide, Miles.
Oh, I'm sorry, John.
Yeah, we've got, and of course, digital learning realities research. This year's research cycle, looking at how learning leaders are really using all the technologies that are out there, what their strategy is for the next few months, their priorities, their challenges, how they're using AI, of course. The full report for this year's 9-grid for digital learning and the Knowledge Centre, which is one of the newer areas of our site, which kind of gathers all these things together. It's got the 9-grids, the realities, all the viewpoint papers as they become available, infographics, decks from our sessions at events, everything pulled together, searchable by topic, media type, segment of the market, everything. So do have a look at that. Jack's just posted the links in the chat very, very helpfully. Yes, thank you to everyone for all your questions and your time. Miles, thank you for all your answers. We will see you for the next one. The next one is the TA 9-grid, which comes out at the start of June, and the Ask the Analyst session for that will be a few weeks after. So for today, thanks very much. We'll see you for the next one.
Thank you, everybody. Really enjoyable session. Thank you.